Hi, I'm Ava, and I'm 34 years old. I live with my husband James. We both work for the company his dad started. James' dad made the company huge, worth $250 billion a year. He even bought other construction companies. People respect him for being smart in business, even though he could be tough. James is supposed to take over, but he's not tough like his dad. He's kind, but sometimes too unsure. I worry he can't handle being a husband or a CEO. James has said, "I don't think I'm CEO material. If I end up as one, I'll likely just be a face for the company." It's simpler that way, indicating he's not really interested in running things. We've been married for 5 years, and I'm starting to get annoyed by his lack of drive. Unlike James, I'm pretty good at making decisions. Back when my father-in-law was running things, he trusted me with different jobs because of this. Before I married James, I worked at a bank, so I know how to handle money and keep track of numbers. After getting married, I decided to stop working and focus on taking care of our home. But my father-in-law asked me to join the construction company instead. Soon after I started, he started asking me to come to board meetings and share my thoughts on how to manage things. At first, the board members weren't sure about having the founder's daughter-in-law in important meetings. But as I kept giving useful ideas, they started to listen to me. James was also on the board, but he hardly ever came to meetings, and everyone thought that was okay, even my father-in-law. One day when I got home from a meeting, I found James just sitting there watching TV like nothing was wrong. "Why did you come to the meeting today?" I asked, annoyed. "You're an important part of it. You should take it seriously." But he just shrugged and said, "Even if I went, I wouldn't understand what's going on. Plus, the board members seem to like you better, so it's not a big deal, right?" I couldn't help but wonder if he was bothered by me being involved in the meetings. Despite his comments, my father-in-law had been showing me the ropes of running the business and seemed to be grooming me for a bigger role. I started to enjoy being part of the management, and before I knew it, I was working hard to live up to my father-in-law's expectations. After about 2 years of attending meetings, my father-in-law retired completely. When important decisions needed to be made, the board members would come to me for advice, leaving James out of the loop. I had hoped this would motivate James to step up, but instead he became even more distant from his work. He'd show up at the office in the morning but disappear by noon, spending the rest of the day at home. When he came home, he avoided talking about work altogether, seeming like he didn't care about what was happening in the company. Meanwhile, my workload kept growing, and I was getting busier. After my father-in-law retired, the board members started depending on me more and more, giving me tasks that felt like what a CEO would do. Since we're a big company with lots of employees, I was focused on increasing sales and profits to benefit everyone who worked with us. Thanks to the hard work of our employees, our sales started going up. I found running the company more and more interesting and got really into my work. But on the flip side, my husband James seemed to be losing interest in his job, and he started showing up at the company less often. Our conversations at home became less frequent, and our relationship started feeling strained. And around that time, I bumped into your sister Megan, and we grabbed lunch together. James came home and casually mentioned, "My sister Megan is a bit older than me and had just gone through a divorce about 6 months ago. It happened because she cheated, which caused a big scene when her angry husband showed up at our parents' house. So when Megan's husband got really upset, James went over to my parents' place to calm him down since I was busy with work." James, who had a gentle upbringing and a calming personality, was able to talk Megan's husband down and convince him to leave for a while. Later, Megan told me, "Your husband is amazing. He handled my angry husband so well," she praised him. Megan's husband must have been impressed by James's calm and easygoing attitude. Megan ended up divorcing her husband and paying alimony. But after that incident, she seemed to see James in a different light. Before, she might have just thought of James as a rich, pampered guy who wasn't particularly attractive and a bit indecisive. But now, she seemed to view him as a respectable businessman. Now that Megan was single after her divorce, she probably saw James as a great catch, as she always liked wealthy men. But I was too focused on work to even think about such things. My sister wouldn't have known that James doesn't actually run the company. He's just a figurehead. Megan's ex-husband was a top employee at a foreign company and used to boast to me at their wedding, saying, "My husband is a great worker with a big salary and he's good-looking too." "You're probably jealous," he teased. He was handsome, smart, and had a cool style. I couldn't understand why Megan would cheat on such an amazing husband. 3 months after James mentioned having lunch with Megan, I came home to find him looking unusually serious. We need to talk, he said, which surprised me because he'd never been so serious before. I felt nervous as I waited for him to continue. Actually, Megan is pregnant with my child, and I want a divorce, he dropped the bombshell. I was shocked by the request for a divorce, but even more stunned to hear about Megan's pregnancy. Speechless, I listened as James said, Megan plans to come over on our next day off to discuss this, so I'm counting on you. I was stunned and asked him, so he want to marry my sister? James looked troubled as he replied, it's not that I want to marry her, but as she's carrying my baby, I guess I have no choice. I sighed at James's usual indecisiveness and said, well, as she's having your baby, I guess we have to deal with it. Let's talk more when she comes over. It seemed like James and I couldn't make decisions together, so I decided to talk directly with my sister to sort things out. Even though I had already decided in my heart that I wanted a divorce, I felt I needed to talk to my father-in-law about the situation with the company. Being involved in running the business as the founder's daughter-in-law, I knew that divorcing would change my role. So the next day, I went to my in-laws' house and told my father-in-law everything my husband had said. My mother-in-law, who was there too, was happy about the news of her son having a child. But she quieted down under my father-in-law's stern gaze. She seemed more focused on the grandchild than the company's affairs. After thinking it over, my father-in-law smiled and said, Ava, I want you to keep working in the company just like you have been. James doesn't matter to me. I'll handle it, so let him do what he wants. It was clear that my father-in-law valued the company's management more than his son or grandchild. Even though he had retired, he still had a lot of influence as the founder, and he owned most of the company's shares. No executives would go against his wishes. I was starting to enjoy my work more, and I was hesitant to give it up now that I had settled into the role. It was time to talk about the future with my sister. On my day off, she came to my house with a big smile and said, Ava, it's a shame you couldn't have a baby. I'll give you a lot of money for consolation. Please leave this house as soon as you can, she said triumphantly. My husband sat there silently, not saying a word, even though he was the one who caused all the trouble. I was shocked by his indifferent expression and said, it's fine if we get divorced, but we also need to figure out alimony and divide our assets properly. Let's get a lawyer involved and sort it out. I never imagined you, my own sister, would fall for someone like James, I said to my sister sarcastically. She gave me a stern look for a moment, but then composed herself. I realized she was trying to say that it's what's on the inside that matters, not looks or wealth. It was amusing to hear her talk as if she knew my husband's true self completely, and I struggled to hold back my laughter as I replied, that's wonderful. I hope you two have a happy life together from now on. I couldn't help but wonder if by inner self, my sister meant money. She seemed to think my husband was the big shot at my father-in-law's company, but it didn't seem like she had heard anything from him directly. After our discussion, my sister announced that she would move in and arrange for a moving company. Knowing my sister's temper, I only took the essentials with me, having already secured a new apartment. I also hired a lawyer and prepared documents for property division and alimony claims. The next day, after moving out, I began negotiations for alimony and property with my husband and sister, with my lawyer by my side. My husband remained indifferent, while my sister did all the talking. I'm willing to pay whatever alimony you ask for, so take your time to decide, my sister said. Upon hearing this, my lawyer decided to pursue alimony from my sister as well, not just my husband. My sister was already paying alimony to her ex-husband in installments, so my lawyer had warned that it might be difficult to claim alimony from her. Since my sister offered to pay whatever amount I wanted, I decided to go ahead and make a claim. During the property division negotiations, my sister eagerly pointed out, this mansion belongs to James's family, so it shouldn't be included in the property division, right? The lawyer replied calmly, this building and the land are owned by the company, so it's up to the company to decide. It appeared that even my husband had assumed this house belonged to his father. Oh really? I thought this was Dad's, he casually remarked. In contrast, my sister seemed surprised and turned to the lawyer, demanding, wait, does that mean I can't live here? The lawyer replied professionally, since it's company property, you can continue living here if the company permits it. My sister seemed relieved at this and said, oh, you should have mentioned that earlier. It'll be fine since James, the president, will be living here. my sister confidently stated, causing the lawyer to be momentarily surprised before bursting into laughter. What are you talking about? Ava is the president, not James, the lawyer clarified, looking at my sister, who was planning to remarry my husband. It didn't even know this basic fact made me chuckle. My sister immediately turned to my husband and exclaimed, "Wait, James, you're not the president." Seeing my husband's troubled expression, I stepped in and explained to my sister, "James is just an advisor without any executive authority. I'm the executive director and also the president. Our father-in-law, the founder, used to be the president, but he appointed me as executive director and then president when he retired. The other executives supported my performance and there was no opposition." Meanwhile, my husband, due to his father's arrangement, was receiving an executive salary as an advisor without any executive power, which was more of a disappointment than a true position of authority. Even though he was technically receiving an executive salary, since he wasn't actively working, it was even less than what a regular employee would earn. Therefore, I was the one covering all our living expenses. My husband, who had little interest in our household finances, didn't even bother to check whether the house we lived in was owned by the company or by his father. Despite being company-owned, my responsible father-in-law had always charged me rent. Although I considered it a standard rental arrangement, the lawyer, still chuckling, asked, "Can we continue to charge James rent for this house?" My sister reacted strongly to the idea of rent, saying, "Rent? Why should James pay rent? Isn't it the company's property? Let's just let him stay for free." The lawyer then presented the rent amount, which caused both my sister and her husband James to be taken aback. "I guess rent for a house this size would be high. I can't afford that with my salary," he admitted. His executive compensation barely left him with any extra money, and paying that rent would make covering their living expenses even more challenging. Over their 5-year marriage, James had depleted his modest executive compensation entirely. My own salary had been swallowed up by the exorbitant rent and living expenses, leaving us with little in terms of assets. Splitting what little savings we had was the only option for dividing our assets. After the lawyer departed, my sister, now aware that the grand mansion she had envisioned was merely rented, looked utterly crestfallen, staring into space. James, as usual, wore his trademark grin. I suggested, "Why don't we leave this place and move back in with your parents? Your mother was thrilled about the pregnancy news." James agreed, but I couldn't help but chuckle at the irony of having to consider the opinion of a man who was soon to be my ex-husband. While I pondered whether this unreliable man was capable of raising a child, I ultimately decided it wasn't my concern. Turning to my sister, who seemed to have forgotten about her own alimony, I asked, "Are you all right with the alimony arrangement, sis? You seemed so confident earlier, but you're also paying your ex-husband, right?" She was taken aback, her expression snapping back to reality. "Alimony? I have to pay too." She seemed shocked, apparently having missed the earlier discussion entirely. "You said you provide plenty of alimony, but you didn't expect me to pay as well, did you?" "My salary is quite low." James and my sister exchanged surprised glances. Though not a lawyer, observing these two made me want to burst into laughter. I had already gathered signatures on the divorce papers and alimony requests. Although it didn't affect me much, witnessing James and my sister in this state was rather pitiful. My ex-husband, now remarried to my sister, had moved back to his parents' house, just as I had predicted. However, it seemed that there were constant arguments between my sister and my in-laws. The root of the conflict was the lie about my sister being pregnant with my ex-husband's child. His mother, hoping for an heir, was furious. My father-in-law, who had always harbored ill feelings towards my sister for stealing his son from me, hadn't even spoken to her. He covered the alimony for both James and me, and I received my share in full. However, witnessing this, my sister pleaded with him, "Dad, could you also pay my alimony?" His response was sharp, "I have no reason to be called Dad by you," clearly enraged. Failing to achieve any of her desired outcomes, my sister fled from my ex-husband's family home without a word and disappeared. She had essentially remarried her ex-husband just to shoulder the burden of alimony, which seemed incredibly foolish to me. My ex-husband appeared to entertain thoughts of reconciling with me, but his father sternly rebuked him, saying, "You're not even capable of taking care of yourself, let alone a family." Even if he begged, I wouldn't consider getting back together with him. His betrayal of my sister shattered any trust I had in him, and his indifferent demeanor only fueled my disgust. During our discussions, he was stripped of his executive position and now works as a temporary employee. Meanwhile, I've remained the CEO, which remains the central focus of my life. I have no intention of remarriage post-breakup. I've maintained a connection with my father-in-law, seeking his advice when necessary. For now, my priority is the company, which I view as a marriage dedicated to the well-being of my employees.